Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Sparking Communication and Relationships at Work, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Susan Landay. My name is Sarah, and I will moderate today's webinar. The webinar will last around 1 hour. If you have any questions, just type them into the question area on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll answer them as we can or after the session by email. Today's webinar is sponsored by HRDQ Consulting. Are you looking for live training classes delivered right to your learners wherever they are? HRDQ's virtual instructor-led training classes allow your learners to keep the training, teamwork, and communication going, but from a distance. Real-time interaction between instructors and classmates provides a powerful learning experience, the performance improvement, and cultural shift you need. Learn more at www.hrdqstore.com/consulting. Our presenter today is Susan Landay. Susan is the president of Trainers Warehouse. She joined her father in 1997 in what was then a fledgling business. Prior to that, Susan spent 2.5 years consulting and training in the field of negotiation and another 2 years marketing a business history consulting company. She graduated from Yale College with a BA in 1986, the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University with an MBA in 1992, and Ringling Bros and Barnum & Bailey Clown College with an MFA in 1987. Susan values using humor to enhance training. It's an honor to have you speaking with us today, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And I have to say, we've worked with HRDQ. Trainers Warehouse has worked with HRDQ for so many years now, and it's been such a wonderful collaborative relationship between our two companies. So thank you for having me today. And welcome to everybody. We started off with a few questions, just as we were kind of warming up the crowd before we started. But as we get started into the bulk of the presentation, I want us to just start with a story. So as a kid, I moved around a lot. We were mainly based in Rochester, New York. And when I was in 8th grade, we moved to New Hampshire. And I had this really close-knit group of friends. And so when I moved, it was like one of these, I mean, you can imagine, you know, the new kid coming into the class for the first day, how uncomfortable that is. But my best friend from Rochester said, you know, don't worry about it, Sue. Just, you know, tap someone on the shoulder when you go in and say, you know, hi, I'm Sue, what's your name? So I did that. I took Lynn's advice. I tapped this girl's shoulder and introduced myself. And it turns out this girl, I think her name was Betsy or something. And she, you know, she led me around the first couple days and told me who's who and helped me find the lunchroom and the gym and everything else I needed. But Betsy was kind of like this meek, shy young girl, and I kind of wasn't. So, you know, we weren't probably ever going to be best friends, but it was helpful to know somebody. And I learned at that point pretty early on that, you know, meeting people and introductions can be very different from building relationships. So fast forward, you know, I guess maybe 8 years, you saw in my bio that and what Sarah said, that I went to the Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Clown College. So one of the interview questions on that application was, how do you enter a crowded room? And I don't know if it was, you know, thinking back on, you know, what that experience was in 8th grade and moving, or if it was just kind of being older or whatever. But, you know, I think how I answered that was, I go slowly. I take a look at the room and I see kind of who's who and what's what before I just dive in. And, you know, we all kind of take on this challenge of meeting new people differently. And so what we're going to be focusing on in the next hour or so is what makes it difficult to form new friendships and relationships and work relationships as adults. Why it's hard, why it's important, and how we can do it better. So before we get started, I am going to do an icebreaker. It should be a little interesting because we're not live. And I learned from Sarah earlier in the week that while I can see the responses that you write and I can reply to them, you unfortunately aren't able to see them, but we're going to give it a go in any case. So my first introduction question is to just ask you guys to write in the question box, just introduce yourselves to me. And again, I know that these kinds of icebreakers can be awkward and people say, you know, they're a waste of time. I actually have a purpose in doing this. I'm going to be really transparent about it because I want to use this experience. And actually, I'm going to be asking 3 separate questions. I'm going to use this later in the presentation as we understand this process of getting to know each other. So I am seeing some answers here. Hi, I'm Simone. I see there's Janine from Pittsburgh and Peggy, someone from California, the National Park Service. Oh, we have someone from Dubai. That's awesome. I'm seeing someone from Goodwill Company. And the answers just keep coming in, which I love. Let me pause just a moment here as we continue to see, and thank you for introducing yourselves to me. So this next question is, we're going to dig a little deeper, and so my next question is, we're going to have a little fun with it. I used some of these conversation prompts as we were just getting started in the webinar, as I mentioned, but we're going to click the button below and pick a topic. So let's see. So a sporting event you'd most like to attend. So we're going to shift gears, and this time I'd like you to type in your answer to this question. Okay, so for me, and I guess for all of us probably during this time of coronavirus, we're all kind of feeling like there are a lot of sporting events we'd like to see because we can't see anything. I think for me, what probably tops the list is seeing one of my kids, you know, playing baseball, because I'm really missing those games. So Olympic Games, gymnastics, ice skating, Patriots, Ravens, volleyball. Oh, Sarah, we can't keep up. Olympics, horse racing, so many. So now we're seeing something a little bit different. You know, it's not just names and places. We're learning a little bit about different people's interests. Baseball, taekwondo. So we're learning a little bit more about people. This third question is going to be a little bit more difficult because we're digging a little deeper now. So in this question, I want to ask you if you would possibly share a hard choice you had to make. And just to kind of get us started, I'll share that, you know, I don't know if many of you were familiar and know Trainer's Warehouse, but about 8 years ago, we launched a second brand called Office Oxygen. And we wanted to reach a little bit further into organizations selling products to people who wanted to engage their workforce and, you know, not just focus on training, but kind of be a little bit broader. So my hard choice that I had to make recently was to let that brand go because it's probably more TMI, but I think in this time of Amazon, it's harder to build that brand than to kind of build new markets through Amazon. So that was my hard choice. Sarah, these are going so quickly. Can you share some of these that you're reading?
Yes, these are going really fast. We appreciate all of this participation. We had a response come in that said to work or to stay home with children. To leave my job, to go back to school full time.
To shower, not while working from home. I like the humor also. Starting my own company. switching careers. And imagine, if you will, as I said, we're not doing this live. You can't see one another's answers, but imagine yourself also sharing some of these answers with someone who you might be standing across from or talking to on the phone, and what that experience might be like. And as I said, I never do an icebreaker without a purpose for doing that. And so I want to kind of tease out, if I can, what the experience of answering those three really different questions was, right? So the first one was just introduce yourself. And I want you, as I'm speaking, to kind of give me a sense of what your feelings were as you had to answer some of those different questions. Easy, hard, comfortable, uncomfortable. You know, the first one, I didn't give much guidance, so there may have been some uncertainty there about what kind of information I might be looking for. You know, is it name, company, where you live? And we may be sharing some of that information, but not really learning much about each other. In that second question, right, we asked about a sporting event. So if you were face to face with somebody, you might find that you found some common interests, some common ground there. You learned a little bit more about them just than a name and a place. And finally, you know, the third question, if you were face to face, it might have been a little bit awkward. It gets a little bit deeper, but you also learn more about that person. And so there's kind of more of a connection there. And I'm just kind of reading through some of your responses as I'm going. And, you know, I think many of you found them easy. I wasn't trying to do anything tricky here, but I think the point is that you ask different questions depending on what your goal is and what you want to learn about people. So I want to dig in again. Over the next hour, we're going to talk about building adult relationships, what makes it difficult, why it's important, and how we can do it better. If only it were as easy for us as it is for Cookie Monster, right? He says, a friend is someone to share me cookie with, and that's not a typo. That's Cookie Monster. For us, it's harder than that. So if you would share, please, some responses to this question. What makes it hard for you as an adult to make new friendships, new relationships, whether it's at work or outside of work? I'm seeing a lot of replies about trust, not wanting to small talk, feeling that there may be some judgment, people detesting small talk, fear of not having any commonality, not being vulnerable or sharing your vulnerability. It can be awkward. I tell you guys, I could have written this in the presentation. This is what you all are sharing with me, and I think you're right on it. It can be scary, especially outside of work. Sarah, are there others that have popped up to you that you want to draw attention to?
We have some responses here, people saying that they're an introvert, so it takes them a while to get to know someone, that as they get older, they're more selective with the people that they would like in their life.
Excellent points. So as I've been doing research about this and also seeing your responses, I start to see, you know, a couple of things sort of float to the top. People also have less time. They're concerned that at work it may not be appropriate, you know, to share themselves and to share their personal side. There may be conflict or power struggles, personality differences, Carla just shared, and you know, all of those things are true. We're going to dig into that a little bit more, but before we do, I want to ask you guys, And, oh, this is our poll, Sarah. So I'm going to start this. Hold on. You guys, you're going to be able to select a poll. Sorry. This is my first time doing this. Sarah, I'm having trouble doing it.
I can
Oh,
launch
I got it.
poll. Oh, you got it? Okay.
I've got it. Okay.
Perfect.
So we have a poll. When did you meet your closest friends? So was it when you were in grade school, in high school, graduate school? Was it later in your adult life? Maybe when you first had your kids? You know, when, as you think about your current closest friends, when did you meet them? When in your life did you meet them? Let's see. Results are still coming in. So right now, I'll just share with you, grade school and high school together is about 40%. College grad school is close to another 20%. Later in life is 36% or so right now. And those numbers seem to be holding. So the theme here is, you know, a lot of us have met those kind of key people in our lives during those earlier years of our lives. Sarah, do we need to pause this in order to go to the next slide?
Yeah. There you go. You should be able to go to the next slide now.
Oh, I can also share. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we had them sharing as you were speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. And now you can hide those results and you are back in your PowerPoint now.
All right. Thanks. Thank you all. So in these early years, we have a lot of shared experiences, right? We're going to clubs together. We're, you know, we're on sports teams, in theater groups, in bands. You know, all of these, you know, we're dealing with teachers and tests and all of these really difficult times of our lives that we're going through together. And at work, we may be together a lot, but the quality of that time may not be quite the same. It may not be as meaningful as some of those experiences we shared with, you know, with these friends who we grew up with. Whoops, wrong way. So as we think about these experiences that are shared, I want to just tell you about this study I read recently by Augusto Giacomin, who at Yale did this study about the experience of eating chocolates. And he gave these same super delicious chocolates to both groups of people and to individuals. And then he asked them, like, how tasty were they? And when people were consuming them together as a group, they found them to be way more tasty than when they had them just, you know, one person at a time. So he thought, well, maybe it's just that, you know, shared experiences are more enjoyable when they're pleasant. So he did a second version of this, and he gave them kind of bitter, not very tasty chocolates. And he wanted to figure out, you know, he asked them, well, how were they? How, you know, did they taste good, not good? And when people had them as a group, once again, they were nastier, 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 much more bitter and unpleasant than when people had them as their own. He found over and over that experience were intense, positive, they were shared. He went on to create this, this chart to understand the difference between different of shared experience. So you'll see there's, you know, where does this experience fall? Is it a low stress or high stress activity? On the vertical is meaning. Is it a meaningful experience or not very meaningful? So a social experience like, you know, going out to dinner or drinks, you know, there may be less bonding in that experience. Whereas, you know, if you're going for playoffs or you're, yeah.
Susan,
Are we
you seem to
okay?
be cutting out a little bit with the
Yes.
audio. Yeah, let's see if it can come back.
Much better on this side. Sounds better. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, and you can't see me, but I'll just go on my way, and maybe we'll connect again visually at the end. So these formative activities, we had a lot of them when we were in, you know, middle school, high school, graduate school, medical school, whatever that might be. And while we're together a lot at work, we may not be having those same kind of formative activities that have a lot of meaning and, you know, combined with some stress, but still they've brought us together. And so in the absence of that, we kind of need to figure out how we can create that as adults. So it's one of the key components to building adult relationships is having these shared experiences. I'd suggest that the second one is vulnerability and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Several of you, when we asked that question earlier about what makes it hard, mentioned this topic of vulnerability. Robert Epstein wrote this quote, that vulnerability is the key to emotional bonding. We're cutting in and out again.
It seems that GoToWebinar is having interview issues. How does it?
So this is a GoToWebinar is having the issue on their end. And I'm hearing also some no problem.
Issue on there. People are saying the speaker's working fine.
Okay.
Okay. So continue. You can continue on. I'll mute myself to with that.
All right. So so Robert Epstein came. You know, I had read this quote and wanted to dig in a little bit more on this topic of vulnerability. And I happened upon, I don't know if you guys have seen this, upon a TED Talk by Brené Brown, who was talking about vulnerability. And she starts off in her TED Talk asking of a time when they felt particularly vulnerable. So, you know, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking that time for me was probably when I was asked to do a presentation by a catalog organization and they asked us each block, something that didn't work as well as we wanted it. And we were sharing it with, you know, with people in our industry who we knew really well. And so I ended up sharing the experience of closing down Office Oxygen and that whole decision. And I remember feeling, I don't know if I would call it weak, but certainly vulnerable and a little uncomfortable and strange about doing that. And she said, okay, now I want you to think about someone else in a similar situation who is, you know, sharing a flock or doing something that made you feel so vulnerable. And I want you to think about what thought of that person as or as courageous. That's really interesting because I so did think of those other people as courageous in both taking risks and sharing them. And I didn't associate vulnerability at all with weakness. And so I think that that's to this thoughts about what it is to be vulnerable. So another vulnerability memory that sticks with me dates back to college. And I had a couple of really close girlfriends, and at one point I sort of felt them pulling away from me. And, you know, I was one of these kids, having moved around a lot. I had, you know, close friendships with a bunch of different people, but not one whole group. And so these were really important friends to me, as I guess any of our friends are, right? And so at one point I start crying and breaking down and telling them, you know, how sad it made me. And I learned from that experience that they needed to be needed. They didn't realize how much I valued and needed their friendship. So I understood at that point that it's not just about, you know, being vulnerable isn't just, you know, letting someone into your life. It's also giving a gift to other people when you let them in, that they need to be needed. They need to feel that. And Sarah, how is our sound now? Are we okay? I see a smiley face from someone, so I'm gonna keep going. I think we're okay.
Yeah. Yep, I think the sound came back.
Okay, good. And I appreciate that at work it can be even more uncomfortable to share your vulnerability. In fact, I was working with some of my colleagues to create some question and discussion prompts for meeting openers, and we had some questions on there like something that you procrastinate or something you wish you were better at. And they said, you know, Sue, I don't think you should have questions like that because I don't know if people are going to feel comfortable sharing answers to questions like those. And I thought, well, you know, as a manager, I would love that information because it's by knowing things like that that allows you to kind of shift gears or move things around or, you know, get them the support and the help that they need. But I get that sharing your vulnerabilities at work is difficult. So we kind of have this catch-22, where on one hand, you know that you need to show vulnerability to build relationships and to make those strong, and on the other hand, you kind of feel tentative and don't want to. The reason I have to say that I have this meme up is because I feel like kids these days they find something that makes them uncomfortable or they feel strange or vulnerable and they say, well, this is awkward, and then they kind of say it and they're very transparent about it. I'm not so sure that we as adults do that same thing. So if we think of shared experiences and vulnerability as kind of two of those key challenges for adult relationships, I think the third, and again, many of you shared this in your answers to the questions, but having conflict, it's a part of as we're all sequestered with people who we probably love and who are also at the same time maybe driving us crazy. You know, we know that it's something that's just part of life. And, you know, some of us may be more comfortable either just walking away if we were, you know, there was a conflict within your group, you could maybe go merge to something else. Conflict in your workplace, you kind of have to deal with it, or maybe you're sweeping it under the rug. It's not necessarily as easy to just walk away from. So we need to figure out ways to deal with it. And to do that, I want to talk about the interdependence of communication and relationships. And I want to kind of walk you through this pillar of trust as a way with communication. And, you know, is what allows us to form relationships and to get to know people. And it's through talk and understanding, sharing and listening that relationships start to bloom and they start to grow. As the relationship, you see the arrows kind of go up and down. As the relationship is stronger and better, you're able to communicate and discuss deeper and more challenging topics. And that sort of like spirals around each other. And as your communication and your relationship both get stronger. Now, from good relationships, there are a lot of benefits, including self-confidence, reduction of stress, good health, but probably the best and the most powerful is trust that allows us to take on risks and to solve problems, to take on new challenges. But trust is also kind of tricky. The Getting to Yes folks, the Harvard Negotiation Project, one of the tenets or one of the recommendations in terms of building trust, I'm not talking about like sharing your deepest, darkest secrets, but a key way to build trust is to sort of let someone in and let them ready. You know, if you start being really cagey, like you're holding something back and you're trying to be not trustworthy, that's what's going to meet you in return. You guys have seen it recently, but you may remember the song that Tevye sings to his wife Golda when she's asked, do you toils? And Golda says to Tevye, well, do you love me? And he says, yes, I suppose I do. That he does have this love, and he took that on, and he was met with that in return. So I just sort of thought that was kind of poignant. As adults is difficult, and yet, is it hard? Yes. Is it important? Yes. I want to share with you you know, engagement has often been correlated with attracting talent, attracting and retaining talent, improving engagement and happiness at work, and reducing turnover. Also apparent in the numbers. So, you know, this study by Tower Perrin data actually looks very similar as well. Organizations with high employee engagement had a 19% increase in operating income. And on top of that, they had a 23% increase, or 28% increase, excuse me, in earnings per share. And the reverse is true also. Companies that had poor employee engagement, they actually had declining operating incomes of 11% drop in earnings per share. Another data point, that productivity is increased when team leaders fostered shared experiences. 18% increase in productivity, and that was a study out of New South Wales. And this third, that close work friendships actually boost employee satisfaction 50%. The other issues. So I've been talking a lot. I know we had this.
Yes. We have some more people.
What's that? Okay, so I'm going to keep going because I'm hearing still clear from Susan. So I often, when I'm presenting to people, I say, you know, I'm sorry. Shall I try computer audio again?
Like, it sounds fine.
Let me keep going. Okay, so this is just my in honor of Cookie Monster at the beginning of the presentation. Because I think we sometimes need to break things up because he felt from me. Okay, but I'm bummed. I got one more for you. This is just to kind of break it up. They say every trait. So why do croutons come in airtight packages? Aren't they just stale bread to begin with? No, I thought it was funny. All right, enough of this. So, gossip. We're moving over to kind of the next chunk here in thinking about how do we go about developing relationships and friendships in a work context. And the common wisdom is that you should be nice and listen actively and not gossip. So I've got another poll here, and we're going to see if this works. And we're going to do this gossip poll. And so I'm going to launch it. Okay, so we talk about, you know, how to build friendships, and common wisdom tells us not to gossip. And we're guessing what % of women's conversation is gossip. And we have answers all over the place. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep going from there because we lost a little time earlier. I'm going to show you the result here. So we're in like 26%, 42, 55%. And the answer is, so this is for men, 55% of their conversation is gossip. For women, it's up closer to 67%. Now, the source is Social Issues Research Center, so I'm not exactly sure, you know, I haven't validated the data, but I just think it's really interesting that, you know, without these shared experiences and sharing our vulnerabilities, what we end up talking about is gossip. So I'm thinking we can do a little better than this. And to kind of jump into that a little bit more, I'm going to ask this other question. You know, how do you start? If let's say you go to a wedding or something, and you don't know a lot of people there, and you want to kind of get to know people, and you know, what do you say? How do you start talking to someone who you don't know? I find myself, if at a wedding, I would ask like, okay, do you know the bride or the groom? How did you meet your spouse or date? I'm going to see someone else said, how do you know the bride or groom? You know, other people, if they're trying to meet someone, that's like the funny line, you know, do you come here often? You might ask, where are you from? I think the common thread in all of these, I love to start with a compliment. Commenting on food. I find that a lot of these ways to kind of jumpstart a conversation, they start with a question, right? You start by asking someone something, and then, you know, you don't want it to be cheesy, but you want to kind of get things rolling. Now, I thought that it was supposed to be that everything that we really needed to learn, we learned in kindergarten. But I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my kids going to show and tell. Now, my kids are you know, teens and young adults now, 16 and 18. But then when they were in preschool, they did their show and tell, and they had circle time. And I remember my older son, it was his turn to share, and he brought in his shark tooth from Miami SeaWorld. And he was so excited about it, and he shared, and of course, it's show and tell is about a kid being in the spotlight and being comfortable with sharing and telling and all of that. And when he came home, I asked him how it went. And he said, well, it was good, and everybody really wanted to see it. And I said, well, did anybody ask you any questions? And he said, well, no, not really. So I was thinking about this, I feel like going back to kindergarten, we did learn how to show and tell, but maybe we didn't learn to ask questions at that time. We're not as good as it now. And we know, when you're at a wedding and you're not sure what to talk about, what do you say? Figuring out what to ask and how to start the conversation is really hard. So I want to talk for a little bit about how we do that. And, the best question, it's really going to depend on what your goal is. So I've developed a structure for thinking about how we pick the right question, and I'm calling it kind of the path to a deep dive. And the first level questions are really kind of surface. They're icebreaker questions, and I'm going to get into more detail on each of these. Common ground, you're trying to understand your common interests. At a deeper level, you're trying to know, who's really the person behind that. And then there are those deeper dive, where you're really having these deeper questions. So let's look at a few examples here. So break the ice kinds of conversations are, fantastic fruits, find the fast food, your ideal car. They're break the silence, but they're not going to get much deeper than that. For common ground, these should still be pretty easy to answer, and you're looking for common interests. And you may not get real deep at this point, but again, when you think about that pillar of trust, and you think about that interconnection between communication and relationship, you're not going to get real deep, and you shouldn't expect to right off the bat. So these kind of help build that relationship little by little and help you understand each other with slightly, more surface kinds of questions. At the third level, you may need to give more thought to answers, and you may need to take more time to understand and flesh these out and to think about these. But questions that would fall into this category are things like a mistake or failure you learned from, a turning point in your life, something you'd like to learn, a major decision that you made, like that's something we talked about in our earlier icebreaker. They start to reveal a little bit more about you. And then we have our deeper dive questions. And when you're talking about diversity or team dynamics, ethics, the things that stress you out, you really need to have, that core of communication and relationship developed to some extent to be able to kind of take these to the next step. I don't know if you all saw this article recently, or actually it wasn't, probably not. It was probably a few years ago at this point, but there was a study by Arthur Aaron who wanted to see if he could make two people fall in love in a laboratory. And it was Mandy Len-Catron who wrote this article in the New York Times, to fall in love with anyone, do this. And Arthur Aaron put together this set of 36 questions. And they started from, the first level of the question was, if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be? And at the deepest, after the last question was, share a personal problem with your partner and have them give you advice, but also reflect back to you how they think you're feeling about it. And he actually did succeed in having these two people fall in love, but there were a couple of qualities of this series of questions that really mirror what we're talking about here that I think are kind of interesting. And that is that as you grow more comfortable with each other, you become more and more willing to answer deeper questions. And second, just the experience of discussing personal topics brings you closer. Sharing your vulnerability, as we said, brings you closer. There are lots and lots of good questions that, that you could come up with. And, there are tons on the web also. But I want to give a couple of tips so that you can kind of make up your own and be prepared depending on what your goals are for conversations. So we talked about that. The first one, understanding your goals. The second is you want to make sure that you keep your questions open-ended. You don't want there to be a yes or no answer. You want people to have to explain. And if it is a one-word answer, be sure to follow up by asking why. Make sure you focus on experiences, interests, and wishes. It's much easier for people to look backward at what they've done than to kind of project forward. And I'm seeing we're kind of tight on time, so I'm going to go through these a little bit more quickly. Making the questions safe, because you don't want people to be put on the spot. Inspire dialogue and sharing. You want to mix would and should. So let's say you're talking about bullying. It would be very different if you asked someone, what would you do if you experienced bullying? You're going to have a different kind of conversation than if you asked, what should you do, or what should one do, right? So how you phrase your questions is going to yield a different kind of conversation. And again, you don't want there to be right answers. You don't want people to be on the spot. You want dialogue and you want sharing. Do make sure that you are transparent in why you're asking your questions. Keep them simple. A long-winded question is much more difficult for people to tease out what they're supposed to answer. Repeat your questions so that people have time to answer them. And take your time, especially on those deep dives. Give people time and a safe space to answer. You don't want to rush it. You may need to kind of keep a parking lot if ideas come up that you may not have the immediate time to address. You might still want to say, that's a really important topic. Let's write that down so we can make sure we come back to it so people feel heard. And, ground rules are critical for, for making people feel comfortable in a deep dive kind of conversation. And a best practice here is really to have people come up with their ground rules on their own, or at least vote on them so you have some buy-in, so that when you come to difficult moments in these conversations, people have this as a safety net to fall back to. And there are lots of tools to build conversations. There are card decks galore with images and quotes and pictures and everything else. There's answer boards. If you want, everybody to be able to answer at one time, you can have them write their answer and show it. You can use balls with conversation prompts on them. HRDQ has been selling these thumb balls, so you toss the ball and you discuss the prompt under their thumb, and they come in all kinds of different topics, ethics and stress management and diversity and change management, leadership, team building, and they can be great resources to make some of these difficult conversations a little bit more fun. Trainers Warehouse has also created, so you don't want to be throwing a ball, this unzip it pocket where you can pull out a card and have people unzip and open up and share. And in this age of Corona, we've also created a remote version. We've used a couple of those over the course of the presentation. As we think about the top takeaways from this past hour and the challenge of building adult friendships, I hope you come away with a couple of kind of key points here. And the first is make sure you understand your goals. What is it that you're trying to come away with? What do you hope to build among the team and among your group? Don't shy away from sharing vulnerabilities. They are, as Robert Epstein said, a key to rich relationships. And make sure that you ask good questions. But overall, please also remember that, I love this quote from Ellen de Botton at the bottom of the slide, that compatibility is an achievement of love. It shouldn't be its precondition. Building relationships is difficult, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, a lot of communication, a lot of asking and listening. And so relationships take work, but the value can be tremendous. So keep at it, create safe environments, and don't be too concerned to share those vulnerabilities. They really make it a tremendous difference. So thank you all. I think we just have a couple minutes probably, Sarah, for questions. Is that right?
Yeah, so thank you all for sticking with us as we work through this technical difficulty. I hope you can hear me now. Susan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I tried to put on my webcam. I'm not sure if that worked, but again, sorry. Thank you all for sticking with us as well, and sorry for those troubles.
Thank you. It seems like it's working, and we do have time. I'm sure that there are many pressing questions, and so we have a couple minutes here if you just want to type them into your questions box, and then we can get those answered for you. And if we're unable to get to them today, we'll get to them via email. We did have some questions come through about people wanting to know where they could find the Unzip It pocket.
So those are at trainerswarehouse.com. And if you do a search for Unzip It, or even just Unzip on trainerswarehouse.com, you will find them. And, we can work with HRDQ also to see if that's a resource that they can make available to you. For the remote version, we're actually giving away right now the Common Ground version of it. It has all of the same prompts as the Unzip It card decks and the Thumball, but it's in a PowerPoint. And we've developed them also for favorites, getting to know you. What am I forgetting? There's 3 or 4 others that will be available. Onward and Upward. And I also saw a question about the slides. I'd be happy to make those available to people.
Perfect. And then I think we'll wrap it up on this question here that Jen had. And she would like to know if you have any suggestions for questions to ask new hires.
Oh, like interview questions. I haven't put those together. And, one of the other things is I do feel like, coming up with good questions, and when we come up with, a ball with 32 conversation starters, it takes a lot of time and we really flush them out. And I think that that's one of those things where I would rather take my time to develop a group of questions like that rather than trying to answer that on the fly. It's a great question. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to answer that one. I'd rather take my time. And it's
great, and that's Unzip It. Yeah, great. And then we can. People would like to know how they get to those that digital download. Do you have a link to that?
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen right now. So here's what we're gonna take a quick second to do. Let's see, you guys. if you go to the Trainers Warehouse website and type into the search bar unzip, you'll see it will come up unzip it remote. And I think if I type in unzip remote, you'll see we have, as I said, a handful. So these each have different prompts. Right now they're set up as PowerPoint macros. You need to enable it. And when you enable, it lets you, you press the button and it randomly picks your next prompt. And I did test it on a Mac. It worked on a Mac as well, but if you need a different version or you don't want the macro version, we can do our best to accommodate that.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. This was a wonderful presentation filled with so much great information. And thank you all for participating in today's webinar and sticking with us through the technical difficulty that we had. I'm glad that we were able to get this corrected.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah. Thanks for the invitation to work with you and to speak.
Great. You all have a wonderful day and happy training.
Be well. Stay safe.